New audiobooks on our channel for free every week. Subscribe and click on the bell so you don't miss it.
Debon's 6 Hats of Thinking preface. Is it possible to increase the effectiveness of your thinking? In January 1985, Time magazine named Peter Huberoff Man of the Year, who played a key role in the successful organization of the Olympic Games in Los Angeles. Usually hundreds of millions of dollars are irretrievably spent on such events. Although the Los Angeles authorities decided not to spend municipal funds on the Olympics, the Games of 1984 brought a profit of $250 million. The outstanding success of these games depended primarily on new concepts and ideas that were effectively implemented under the leadership of Hubert. How are such concepts born? On September 30, 1984, in an interview with the Washington Post, Peter Huberoff explained that he used lateral thinking to create new concepts. Lateral thinking is a technique that I developed quite a long time ago and have already written many books about it. 9 years ago, I was invited to give a 1-hour lecture for members of the Organization of Young Leaders, which was attended by Peter Huberoff. There are hundreds of other examples of the impact of thinking techniques. In my books, I only theoretically describe, explain and make this technique as accessible as possible so that it can be understood and used in practice. Thinking is the main wealth of a person. However, one should never be satisfied with his level of development. No matter how wonderful a person is, he always wants to become even better. Usually, only those unhappy thinkers who believe that their only purpose is only to prove their own rightness, that is, to be complacent, are very satisfied with their thinking skills. Only those who do not understand what our thinking is really capable of can be proud of their achievements in this field. The main problem of thinking is mixing. We're trying to do too much at once. Emotions, information, logic, hopes, and creativity, all this speaks in us at the same time. It's like juggling too many swords. In this book, I put forward a very simple concept that allows a thinking person to concentrate on one thing at a certain time. It allows you to separate emotions from logic, creativity from information. This is the concept of the 6 hats of thinking. Each hat sets a certain way of thinking. In this book, I describe the nature and benefits of all 6 types of thinking. 6 hats of thinking will allow you to control your thinking the way a conductor directs his orchestra. You will be able to direct your thinking in the right direction and demand from him exactly what you want. In addition, when meeting people, it is very useful to be able to change their habitual way of thinking, demonstrating the other side of things. The 6 hats of thinking are simple and convenient, and this is the main value of the concept. Chapter 1. Playing the role of a thinker, you will gradually turn into it. I am quite sure that one of the 2 originals of the thinker Rodin is in Buenos Aires, on the square in front of the Parliament building. At least that's what the guide told me, pointing to the thoughtful bronze figure. In fact, this may not be true for several reasons. Maybe it's not the original, because there are no 2 originals. My guide could have made a mistake. Maybe the statue is not on the square in front of the Parliament building. My memory could have failed me. Why do I insist that this is not an absolutely reliable fact? There are several reasons. The first reason is that one of the chapters of this audiobook is devoted specifically to the use of facts. The other is that I wanted to provoke people who think that facts are more important than their use. I also wanted this famous statue of the thinker to appear before the listener's mind's eye, wherever it is. This is the third reason. The real reason is that this audiobook was written on a plane, on the way from London to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. In any case, in my statement I used the word confident, indicating my faith rather than an objective fact. We all often have to point out how something is asserted. This is exactly what is told in the audiobook. I want you to imagine this broadly, or even too broadly, the encountered image of the thinker Rodin. I want you to imagine the pose of a thinker with his elbow resting on his knee. It is assumed that such a pose befits a real serious thinker. In fact, I believe that thinking should be active and lively, not oppressed and gloomy. However, at the moment this well-known image can be very useful. Take this pose, physically or mentally, and you will become a thinker. Why? Because by playing the thinker, you become one. Tibetans pray by turning special mills, on the wheels of which prayers are written. These prayer wheels send their requests to heaven. And if the wheels are well coordinated, one person can spin a dozen prayer mills, like a circus performer spinning a dozen plates balanced on the end of a long stick. Turning the prayer mill, a Tibetan can even think about washing clothes. The intention to pray is important here, and not the emotional or spiritual thrill that Christians demand from themselves. Much closer to the Tibetan point of view is another Christian view, according to which prayer should be performed even if there is no emotional involvement. After a while, your emotions will catch up with your actions. That's what I mean when I ask you to play the role of a thinker. Take the pose of a thinker. Start with the action. Show your intentions by demonstrating it to yourself and others. And soon your brain will follow you and enter into the role you are playing. Playing the role of a thinker, you will definitely become one. This audiobook describes various scenarios of such a game.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the new items.
Chapter 2. Trying on a hat is a very deliberate action. The most striking feature of the group photos taken more than 40 years ago is that almost every person is depicted in a hat. Old films and photographs in newspapers indicate a clear predominance of hats. Today, a hat is almost a rarity, especially among men. Nowadays, hats are most often a sign of a certain status. They are used as part of the uniform, which in itself defines the role. An overbearing husband who gives orders to his family members is sometimes said to wear a president's hat or a general's cap. A woman who devotes herself to both home and work differentiates between these roles, saying that she wears an administrator's hat or a housewife's hat. Mrs. Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, once said that she transferred the prudence and economy of a housewife into the business of government. The idea of a thinking hat works in the same way. I need to put on my thinking hat and think about your offer well. I'm not sure I want to sell this building. Put on your thinker hat and call me tomorrow. Events are taking a dangerous turn. We have to put on our thinking hats and think about how we can get out of this mess. I have always imagined a thinker's hat in the form of a soft nightcap with a tassel, something like a buffoon's hat, but without its inherent arrogance, which is the only real sign of stupidity. You can not only put on the thinker's hat yourself, but also demand it from others. The deliberate putting on of a hat acts very clearly and definitely. When Nanny put on her hat the other day, it was a very clear signal that she was leaving with the children. No other evidence was needed, it was the last signal. When a policeman puts on his hat, it means that he is beginning to perform his duties. Bareheaded soldiers never seem as serious and intimidating as soldiers in helmets and caps. It's a pity that the shops don't sell real thinking hats. In Germany and Denmark, students wear special hats similar to the headdresses of medieval scholars. However, teachings and thinking rarely coincide. Most often, scientists are too busy studying the thinking of other people to think for themselves. Think about the benefits that a real thinking hat could bring. Don't bother me, can't you see what I'm thinking? I'm going to interrupt this discussion so that we all put on our thinking hats and start thinking about this problem with concentration. I want you to think about it right now. Please put on your thinker hat. I would like to hear your secret thoughts about this plan. Push your thinking hat to the back of your head. You pay me for what I think, and so I sit and think. And the more you pay, the better I think. How about thinking about it consciously? So far, I have only seen the manifestation of the knee reflex. Put on your thinker hat. Thinking, not a reason for an action, thinking. This is the path to better action, so let's take action. The image of a person in a real thinking hat can help bring the mind into the calm and detached states necessary for any thinking that is more than a simple reaction to a situation. Perhaps conscious thinkers could specifically set aside 5 minutes a day to wear a thinking hat when they need to think independently or follow the thinking of others. I want to focus your attention on intentional thinking. This is the main purpose of the thinking hat. It should be worn intentionally. There is a type of thinking that we use almost constantly: walking, chatting, looking around. We answer the phone, we cross the street, we plunge into the bustle and move away from it. We do not need to be specifically aware of the sequence of rearranging our legs during a walk or regulate the rhythm of our breathing. This is background automatic thinking. But there is another type of thinking, much more intentional and focused. Background thinking is required in order to cope with the daily routine, copying the usual thought patterns. Intentional thinking allows you to do much better and more than just copying templates. Everyone knows how to run, but the athlete does it intentionally, improving his ability in the process of regular training. It is not so easy to send a signal to ourselves that we want to get out of the routine and move from a template, copying type of thinking to an intentional one. The idiom of the hat of thinking can become such a clear signal for yourself and others. Let's compare two types of thinking: copying and intentional. When you drive a car, you have to choose the road, stick to a given direction and monitor the movement of other vehicles. You do a lot of quick actions dictated by the previous or subsequent moment. You follow the signals and react to them. This is reactive thinking. So, everyday thinking is very similar to driving a car. You read the road signs and make decisions. But you don't make maps. You use a different type of thinking to make a map. You study the subject and make a plan. This requires an objective and neutral attitude. To make a plan, you need to look wider. This action is significantly different from simply responding to road signs as they appear. This difference can be explained in the following example. Imagine that you are trying to out-argue someone. You defend your statement by giving all sorts of arguments in its favor. You listen to your opponent's arguments only to attack them and show their weakness. You are constantly attacking and defending yourself. Your opponent does the same. The process of drawing up a plan or map is completely different. I am in charge of a program for the development of thinking among schoolchildren. It is called the TTI Trust for Creative Research. Today, this program is successfully used by several million schoolchildren from different countries. The first lesson is called PM and, that is, plus or minus interesting. Instead of reacting to the situation, children make a simple map. First, the student mentally moves in the direction of plus, writing down everything that he notices. Then it goes in the direction of minus and eventually in the direction of interesting, which includes everything that is worth paying attention to, but cannot be written either in the pros or cons. The map is ready, and now the thinker chooses his path. One girl, who quickly and skillfully coped with the exercise, said, "At first it seemed to me that Pommy's program was stupid and far-fetched, because I know what I think. But after going through the PMI, I found that my mind had changed and started working differently." The whole point is how to direct attention in the right direction. In Sydney, in one class, all 30 little boys voted to receive $5 a week for school attendance. After passing the Pommy program without any effort from the teacher, 20 boys changed their minds, deciding that it was a bad idea. One businessman, who had been arguing with a large oil company for a whole month, at a regular business meeting asked all its participants to pass a PMI. He told me that the problem was solved in 20 minutes. After making a map, it is much easier to choose a route. The woman, who had been planning to move from California to Arizona for 2 years, made PAMI together with her 2 sons. After completing a short exercise, the move was cancelled. Paul McCrady, the world-famous inventor of an aircraft that uses only human power to fly, faced a bureaucratic problem. His son suggested that he go through PAMI, and a way out was found. The mapping type of thinking requires a certain detachment. Ordinary no. In general, this reactive type of thinking only works if there is something to react to. That is why the concept of critical thinking as its most perfect form is very dangerous. There is a silly superstition based on a misunderstanding of the ideas of the great Greek philosophers, as if thinking is based on dialogue and dialectical struggle. This mistake has brought a lot of harm to the West. The Western habit of argument and dialectics is vicious, because it leaves everything innovative and creative in the country. Critical thinking reacts perfectly to everything that is offered to it, but it cannot offer anything on its own. Schoolchildren are very good at reacting to everything: textbooks, teachers' comments, TV series. However, after graduation, a young man or girl does not just have to react. They should take the initiative, be able to create and implement plans. Reactive thinking is not suitable for this. To cover the field of effective thinking, I have come up with a special term: the effectiveness of the operation. This is the ability to act and the type of thinking that corresponds to it. The word effectiveness should remind you of the ability to write, literate and count, numbering. I am absolutely sure that effectiveness should become as important an element of education as these 2 skills. In fact, thinking lessons within the framework of the Creative Research Trust, TTI, develop effective thinking. They teach you to set goals, prioritize, and consider alternatives. If our task is not just to react, then we need to know ways to direct our attention. The PAMI exercise is only one of such methods included in the T program. When printing a color card, color separation occurs. First, one color is applied to the paper, then a second color is printed on top of the first color, then a third and further, until finally a full color map appears. The 6 thinking hats in this book correspond to the different colors used when printing the map. This is the way I propose to use to intentionally direct your attention. So it's not just a matter of putting on a hat, but also what color hat we choose. Chapter 3. Intention and its implementation. I want to return once again to the difference between intention and its implementation, because many people misunderstand this problem. I stated that if you behave like a thinker, for example, put on a thinking hat, you will certainly become one. Your thinking will follow your action. The game will become a reality. It may seem that I meant the following: If you have the intention to become a thinker, then this is enough to realize it. Many people will immediately rush to point out the absurdity of this statement. I'll explain to them what's going on. If you have the intention to become a weightlifter, is that enough to lift a barbell? If you have an intention to become a chess player, will it help you win a game against a grandmaster? The answer is no, because in these cases we dream of fulfilling desires that require exceptional skills. But if you have the intention to become a chef, then by following the appropriate steps, you will be able to cook tolerably. Of course, you will not become the second of the Kai without having his outstanding talent, but you will become a much better cook than those who have no intention of becoming one and do not perform the appropriate actions. Please note, intent alone is not enough. You have to act, behave accordingly. It is not enough for a Tibetan to have the intention to pray, he must turn the prayer mill. Obviously, to become a thinker, it is not enough just to consider yourself a thinker. This is the exact opposite of what I said. If you already consider yourself a thinker, then there is most likely nothing you can do about it, because you are complacent and limited. I once asked a group of well-educated, that is, college-educated, Americans to rate their thinking abilities on a 10-point scale. To my surprise, the majority gave themselves 8 points. In other words, their idea of the possibilities of thinking was so limited that everyone considered himself almost perfect in this field. I cautiously assumed that most of the audience simply misunderstood the question. Both at school and at university, they always belonged to the top 10% of students, so an 8-point score was a modest recognition of their academic performance compared to others. I needed an assessment based not on comparative, but on absolute criteria. However, people are usually very happy with their thinking because they don't know how to improve it. The intention to become a thinker is very important, but, unfortunately, it rarely occurs in people. I don't remember ever meeting a person who wants to become a thinker. And, taking into account the above, this is not at all surprising. In addition, the desire to become a thinker implies that you are not yet one. Humor, sex and thinking are the areas of activity where everyone considers himself an expert. When Dr. Luis Alberto Machado suggested establishing a Ministry of Intelligence Development in the Venezuelan government and wished to head it, no one could restrain laughter, but he was persistent. As a result, almost 106,000 teachers were trained under the TTI program. By law, every student in Venezuela must spend 2 hours a week developing their thinking abilities. There is a special subject in schools, thinking. It is studied by schoolchildren, teachers, and parents. The thinking skills that students acquire in the learning process are very important, but the idea of developing thinking skills is much more important. Usually boys and girls at school consider themselves smart or unintelligent, depending on how well they cope with the school curriculum and teachers like it. This is an exclusively evaluative concept of intelligence. It's like being tall or short, handsome or not. There's almost nothing you can do about it. The desire to be a thinker requires a completely different idea of yourself. This is an effective operational skill. A lot can be changed here. You can improve your thinking in the same way that you can learn to play football better or cook better. Venezuelan children know that they can sit down and think about something on purpose and understand that as a result they will be able to come up with new ideas. To do this, they apply the principles of the T program. Using the 6 thinking hats described in this audiobook is one way to strengthen the intention to be a thinker. Being a thinker does not mean being right all the time. In fact, a person who is constantly right is most likely a weak thinker, ignorant, not inquisitive, unable to see alternatives. Being a thinker does not mean being smart. It also doesn't mean that a thinker has to solve all these tricky puzzles, which is what people constantly expect from me. Being a thinker means consciously wanting to be a thinker. It's much easier than being a musician, tennis player, or golfer. No additional devices are required for this. Thus, the intention. This is the first step. It's easy and difficult at the same time. This is somewhat reminiscent of Zen practice, which is easy to write about, but not so easy to implement in practice. To do this, we need a few simple elements. 6 hats of thinking. Now we can consider the implementation aspect. A person frowns or sits with his chin resting on his hand. Is this difference important? The answer: yes, if it's intentional, and no, if it's natural. It's an amazing thing, but it actually works on a physiological level. It can be reasonably argued that a smile causes appropriate physiological reactions and a person becomes happier and less prone to anger. People react to artificial smiles and advertising as if they are real. Signals become reality. The essence follows the form. In general, if you intend to listen to another person, you will spend more time on it, and your thinking will work better. If you consciously furrow your eyebrows intending to reflect, you will not make a decision until you stop frowning, and this decision will be much better than a spontaneous reaction. Hot-tempered young men, thanks to thinking lessons, become less aggressive, since they do not immediately have to resort to standard violent reactions. 6 hats of thinking. This is a very effective way to move from an intention to its implementation. Chapter 4. The role-playing game is a vacation for the ego. People are not averse to fooling around if others understand that they are just playing a role. They are even proud if they manage to portray a very stupid fool, because in this case this is the criterion of success and skill. A person enters a role, and his ego becomes a director. One of the main problems in Zen Buddhism is that the more the ego tries not to be, the more it is due to these efforts. Actors are divided into 2 types. Some are freed from their ego by acquiring the ego of their role as a methodical game. Others control their behavior. Both types. Good actors. And both types send their egos on vacation. Some spend it abroad, others rest at home. Performing a different role allows the ego to go beyond the usual self-image. Actors are often quite modest in everyday life, but the game gives freedom. We don't like to see ourselves as stupid, mistaken, or fooled. But by playing a certain role, we can easily behave in this way and enjoy the masterful game without worrying about the damage that it could cause to our ego. After all, being a good actor is prestigious. Without the protection that a formal role gives us, the ego is in danger. That's why negative-minded people, wanting to express disagreement, usually pretend to be the devil's advocate. It seems to imply that in fact they may agree, but someone has to play this role, and they play it well. The traditional role of devil's advocate is very similar to the black hat thinking, which we will consider further. However, in our case, instead of 1, we have as many as 6 mental roles, each of which is symbolized by a hat of the appropriate color. To play the role of a thinker in the ordinary sense of the word means to take an important step towards actually becoming a thinker. But let's go even further, breaking this big role into 6 parts. These are 6 characteristic characters, similar to the characters of a good pantomime, soap opera, or traditional Western cinema. Even more, they resemble the characters of the Japanese kabuki theater. Everyone easily recognizes a witch in a pantomime. She giggles viciously and plots. She likes to cause a negative reaction from the public. This is her role, and the witch plays it to the end. There is also a noble prince in the play, who embodies the forces of good. An elderly woman in a pantomime represents simple humanity. Traditionally, the role of the prince is played by an actress, and the role of an elderly woman, an actor. This is extremely important, because the main purpose of pantomime is to get as far away from reality as possible in order to show ideas. After all, everyday roles reflect only themselves. Pantomime characters, for the sake of our entertainment, must represent the great forces embodied in man. So the more intentionally and artificially a role is, the more it is appreciated. This is the secret of the success of American soap operas. Now, one common role of the thinking hat is divided into 6 different characteristic roles represented by hats of different colors. Each time you choose which of the 6 hats to wear, you put on a hat of a certain color and play a role that matches it. You are looking at yourself playing this role. You try to play it as best you can. Your ego is protected by this role. It is like a director watching a good performance of the role. By changing the hats of thinking, you change the roles. All roles should be clearly distinguished, just like the roles of a witch and a prince in a pantomime. Thus, a whole company of different thinkers is embodied in you, thanks to the use of hats. All this is part of the mapping type of thinking. As I said before, each hat represents one of the colors used when printing the card. The colors are superimposed, and the result is a full color map. Each of the 6 hats of thinking is described separately in the following chapters. These hats should be as different as possible, and they should be worn appropriately. A red hat is very clearly different from a white one. Black and yellow hats are a sharp contrast. The role of the blue hat is different from the role of the green one. Play comedy and play tragedy. It's not the same thing at all. If you are wearing a clown costume, play the clown. Wearing a robber's hat, play the robber. Enjoy playing different roles. In this case, thinking is not based on your ego, but on the roles you perform. This is how the map is compiled, and then, having received a full map, you will be able to choose your own path. Chapter 5. Melancholy and Other Vibes is a chapter for those who still doubt and to whom the concept of 6 hats of thinking still seems to be a frivolous and meaningless game that cannot improve thinking abilities. Such people should definitely listen to it, others can just skip this chapter. Perhaps the Greeks were right when they believed in the dependence of their moods on various bodily fluids. If you are in sadness and melancholy, it is because black bile has spread through your body. In fact, the word melancholy is exactly what black bile means. Thus, your mood was determined by the fluids, or bodily fluids, filling your body at the moment. These vibes have influenced your thinking. Many people have noticed that the thoughts that come to their mind in a state of depression are significantly different from those that they might have had if they had been in a more joyful frame of mind. Since we know so much about the brain, we can explain the appearance of such fluids. We know that behavior may depend on the ratio of chemical compounds, transmitters acting in the hypothalamus. We know about endorphins, which are morphine-like substances released in the brain, which allows runners to set records. We know that complex neuropeptides secreted by the pituitary gland can spread throughout the brain, splitting into certain elements that affect different parts of the brain. We believe this is the reason for the spring languor of animals. Changing the ratio of light and darkness causes the pituitary gland to secrete substances that cause sexual desire. Over time, we can find out which substances in the brain and, possibly, in the entire circulatory system have a clear effect on our thinking. It has also been established that it is possible to change physiological reactions by developing conditioned reflexes, as Pavlov showed. Animals were trained to respond to an external stimulus by increasing or decreasing blood pressure. Perhaps, over time, 6 different hats of thinking will acquire the status of a conditional signal that activates a certain chemical mechanism in the brain, which in turn will have an impact on our thinking. We can look at this topic from a slightly different point of view and get the same result. If we consider the brain as an active information system, we will see that its functioning differs significantly from the work of passive information systems used in computing and some other fields, for example, in printing. In the book The Mechanism of the Mind, I made an introductory description of active systems. This book was published in 1969 year, but only now it has attracted the attention of specialists in computing systems of the 5th generation, faced with the need for self-organization of active systems. In an active system, information itself is organized according to the principle of templates, and does not lie passively on the surface waiting for some external processor to organize it. Let's say there is a pallet with sand. A steel ball thrown on it remains lying where it fell. If the ball is thrown through any square of the grid, it remains lying directly under this square. It is a passive information system. The ball remains where it was placed. In another pallet there is a soft package of cut new rubber filled with viscous oil. The first ball thrown to the surface gradually sinks to the bottom, bending the surface of the rubber bag under it. Now that the ball has come to rest, the surface has a contour, something like a depression, at the bottom of which the first ball rests. The second ball rolls down the slope and stops next to the first ball. The second ball is active. It does not stay where it was put, but follows the slope created by the first ball. All subsequent balls will roll down to the first one. A cluster is formed. Cluster. Thus, we have a simple active surface that allows incoming information, balls, to organize into a cluster. These are very primitive models, but they illustrate the essential difference between passive and active systems. It is a pity that all our thinking was reduced to passive systems, since the universe of active information has a special character. It is possible to show the functioning of neural networks as active self-organizing information systems, and this is exactly what I intended to do in The Mechanism of the Mind. By the way, the model that I proposed in my book has now been reproduced on a computer and acts largely as predicted. It is the activity of neural networks that allows incoming information to be organized into templates. It is education and the use of such patterns that give rise to perception. If the brain was not able to organize incoming information into patterns, then even such simple things as crossing the road would be almost impossible. Our brain is designed to brilliantly avoid all creativity. It is designed to create templates and use them without modification in the future at any opportunity. But self-organizing systems have one huge drawback. They are limited by the sequence of past experiences, the history of events. Therefore, 5th-generation computers must express emotions or have the ability to make stupid mistakes. Otherwise they will never be able to think. The susceptibility and sensitivity of the nervous system change under the influence of substances circulating in the body. Changing the concentration and composition of these substances leads to the use of a new template. In a sense, we have a separate brain for each initial set of substances. This suggests that emotions significantly affect our ability to think. They are something superfluous, interfering with thinking. People who find it difficult to make decisions can guess that each of the chemical installations of the brain makes a decision that is suitable specifically for it. So both choices are correct, but for different brains. Hence the indecision. In a state of panic or anger, people tend to behave primitively. Perhaps this is because such special chemical conditions occur so rarely in the brain that it does not have the opportunity to acquire complex response patterns. If this is true, then there is a very good reason to train people in such emotional conditions, as they have always done in the army. Thus, we see the importance of changing chemical installations. On the one hand, the growing knowledge about brain activity allows us to understand this importance. On the other hand, this understanding follows from the theoretical analysis of the behavior of active self-organizing information systems. What does this have to do with the 6 hats of thinking? I mentioned earlier that these hats could be the trigger of conditioned reflexes, which are supposed to affect the balance of substances in the brain. The decomposition of various aspects of thinking into components is also of great importance. Intending to think about something in a familiar way, we either try to exclude emotions from our thinking, which then continue to play an imperceptible but very large role in the background, or we rush between reason and feelings. If different chemical installations associated with different ways of thinking actually exist, then such a disordered type of thinking does not allow the brain to develop any installation. Chapter 6: The value of the 6 hats of thinking. The first value of the 6 hats of thinking is that they make it possible to play certain roles. Basically, thinking is limited to the defending ego, which is responsible for most of the practical errors of thinking. Hats allow us to think and talk about things that we otherwise would not be able to think or say without compromising our ego. A clown costume gives a person every right to behave like a clown. The second value of the method is the management of attention. When it is necessary to take thinking beyond a simple reaction, we need a way to switch attention from one aspect to another. 6 hats of thinking. A way of focusing attention on 6 different aspects of the subject of reflection. The third value is convenience. The symbolism of 6 different hats of thinking allows you to ask someone, and yourself, to turn the arrows. You can ask someone to disagree or stop being a dissenter. You can ask someone to be creative or retell your purely emotional reaction. The fourth value of the 6 hats of thinking is their possible connection with chemical processes in the brain, which I briefly described in the previous chapter. I am ready to make a statement that goes beyond traditional knowledge, since the needs of building a theory of self-organizing systems justify such an extrapolation. The fifth value lies in determining the rules of the game. It's easy for people to master them. Explaining the rules of the game is one of the most effective ways to teach children. That's why they master the computer so easily. The 6 hats of thinking set certain rules for the game of thinking. The essence of this game is its mapping, not the usual proof process. Chapter 7: 6 hats, 6 colors. Each of the 6 hats of thinking has its own color. White, red, black, yellow, green, blue. Each of the colors gives a name to its hat. I could call every type of thinking associated with a particular hat a clever Greek word. It would be impressive and someone would surely like it. But it wouldn't have much practical value, since the name would be hard to remember. I want thinkers to visualize these thinking hats in the image of the most ordinary hats. Color is important for this. How else can they be distinguished? The difference in forms, again, would be hard to remember. It would be confusing. Colors promote imagination. The color of each hat is also related to its function. White hat. The white color is neutral and objective. A white hat. These are objective facts and figures. Red hat. The red color suggests anger. The eyes turn red, passion and emotions. The red hat gives an emotional vision. Black hat. Black color is gloomy and negative. The black hat justifies the negative aspects of why something is not feasible. Yellow hat. Yellow is a sunny and positive color. The yellow hat implies optimism and is associated with hope and positive thinking. Green hat. Green is the color of actively growing grass. A green hat means creativity and new ideas. Blue hat. Blue color is cold, besides it is the color of the sky, which is above everything. The blue hat is responsible for the organization and control of the thought process, as well as for the use of other hats. It is easy to remember the function of each hat if you resort to color associations. Remembering the meaning of a particular color, you will remember the function of the corresponding hat. In addition, it is convenient to group hats into 3 pairs: white and red, black and yellow, green and blue. In practice, hats are always associated with their colors and never with their functions. There is a good reason for this. If you ask someone to describe their emotional reaction to something, you are unlikely to get an honest answer, because people believe that it is wrong to be emotional. However, within the framework of our theory, the red hat is neutral. The neutrality of the colors allows you to use hats without embarrassment. From the process of admonition and censure, thinking turns into a game according to certain rules. You can handle hats with the following expressions: I want you to take off your black hat. Let's take off our red thinking hats for a few moments. Stop thinking in a yellow hat. We'll wear the white one. When you are dealing with people who have not read or heard this book and are not familiar with the symbolism of the 6 hats of thinking, explaining the meanings of colors will help to quickly explain the features of each hat. Then be sure to let the interlocutor listen to this audiobook. The more common the idiom, the more effective its use. Ultimately, you should learn to put on and take off hats with ease while at any discussion table. Chapter 8: The White Hat: Facts and Figures. Could you play the role of a computer? Consider the facts impartially and objectively. No interpretations, just the bare facts. What facts are relevant to this case? Computers don't have emotions yet, although we may have to make them emotional if we need to teach them to think intelligently. We expect that in response to our requests, the computer will give only facts and figures. We don't expect the computer to start arguing with us, using facts and figures only to argue its arguments. Facts and figures too often become part of the argument. Facts are more often given for some purpose than reported as is. Facts and figures given in the framework of argumentation can never be considered objectively, so we really need someone who could change the conversation by saying, just the facts, please, without arguments. Unfortunately, within the framework of Western thinking based on a dispute, they prefer to draw a conclusion at the beginning, and only then the facts supporting it. The cartographic type of thinking I put forward is based on the fact that you should make a map at the beginning and only then choose the path. This means that first we need to have facts and quantitative data. Thus, white hat thinking. This is a convenient way to highlight a neutral and objective consideration of facts and figures. Once in the United States, a serious case was brought against IBM. In the end, the case was dismissed, perhaps because the United States realized that the country needed IBM's strength to fight the powerful Japanese competition in the electronic products market. In addition, there was another reason for the termination of the case. IBM submitted so many documents, in my opinion, something like 7 million, that no court could cope with such a volume. In the event of the death of a judge before he makes a decision on the case, the consideration must begin again. Since judges are appointed only to those who have reached a certain age, there was a very high probability of the judge's death before the end of the case, unless a young judge was appointed who would link his future career with this case. The moral of this story is this: a request to provide facts and quantitative data can be answered with such a large amount of information that the questioner will be simply stunned. If you need facts and figures, get them. Get them and do whatever you want with them. This answer is understandable, because any attempt to simplify the facts can be perceived as a selection of facts in order to turn the matter to your advantage. In order not to drown in a sea of information, a person who wants to use a white hat can formulate his request in such a way as to get only the necessary data. Put on a white hat and state your view on the problem of unemployment. Now that 6 months have passed since graduation, provide me with statistics on applicants. The formulation of the guiding question is part of a normal information request. Lawyers who are experienced in introducing cross-examinations do this all the time. Ideally, the witness should wear a white thinking hat and state the facts. Judges and lawyers with the right to appear in court in the dema of a white hat might seem the most appropriate. As I said, he returned to his apartment at 6:30 in the morning because he had been gambling all night. Mr. Jones, did you really see the defendant gambling on the evening of June 30th, or did he tell you so? No, Your Honor, but he goes to play almost every night. Mr. Jones, what would you say if you wore a white thinking hat? I saw the defendant returning to his apartment at 6:30 on the morning of the 1st of July. Thank you, you can go back to your seat. It should be said that lawyers in the courtroom are always trying to turn the case in their favor. Consequently, their questions are formulated in such a way as to strengthen their own argumentation or refute the argumentation of the other side. Of course, this completely contradicts putting on the white hat of thinking, but the role of the judge is curious. There are no juries in the Danish judicial system. 3 judges or legal advisors are trying to establish the facts of the case, using exclusively white thinking. Their task: create a map and then make a decision. A different practice is adopted in England and the United States, where a judge is required to monitor compliance with the rules of testimony, and then, based on the facts obtained by lawyers, make decisions himself or the jury does it. Thus, any person who formulates questions in order to get information should be sure that he himself is wearing a white hat. Are you really trying to get the facts, or are you trying to find confirmation of your theory? Last year in the United States, turkey meat sales increased by 25% due to the fashion for diets and a healthy lifestyle. Turkey meat is perceived as lighter. Mr. Fitzler, I asked you to put on a white hat. An increase in sales by 25% is a fact, the rest, your interpretation. No, sir. Marketing research clearly shows that the reason why people prefer to buy turkey meat is that, in their opinion, there is less cholesterol in it. Well, then you have 2 facts. The first fact: over the past year, turkey meat sales have increased by 25%. The second fact: according to some marketing research, people claim that they buy turkey meat because they are worried about cholesterol. The white hat sets certain directions in which to move forward, working with information. Ideally, by wearing a white hat, we should strive to obtain pure facts. Obviously, this role requires some skills, perhaps more than putting on other hats. The trend is that the number of women smoking cigars is increasing. This is not a fact. This is a fact. I have the data. Your data only shows that for 3 years the number of women smoking cigars has consistently exceeded the level of the previous year. Isn't this a trend? Perhaps, but this is already an interpretation. In my opinion, the trend suggests that what is happening now will continue to happen. Data. This is a fact. Perhaps a woman smokes more cigars because they generally smoke more. The reason for this may be increased anxiety or the fact that over the past 3 years, cigar manufacturers have spent unprecedented amounts on persuading women to smoke cigars. In the first case, we have a tendency that could give us favorable opportunities. The second trend gives a little less opportunity. I used the word trend to describe the growth reflected in the quantitative data. You may have used the word trend correctly, but there is another meaning to it. Trend is an ongoing process. So maybe it would be better to put on a white hat and say, the data show an increase in the number of women who smoke over the past 3 years. We can discuss later what this means and what it may be related to. Thinking in a white hat turns into a practice that helps to clearly separate facts from their extrapolation or interpretation. It is easy to imagine that politicians may have significant difficulties with this kind of thinking. Chapter 9. Thinking in a white hat. Whose fact is it? Is it a fact or a probability? Is it a fact or a certainty? Are there any other facts? Now we can go back to the statement I made at the beginning of the audiobook about the Rodin thinker on the square in Buenos Aires. The fact is that I was in Buenos Aires. The guide pointed to the Rayan statue. Also a fact. And the fact is that she, as it seemed to me, claimed that it was the original. The sculpture was located in front of the Parliament building. This also seems to be a fact. The last 2 statements are subjective, since memory is prone to errors. And even if I remember everything perfectly, the guide could have been mistaken. Therefore, I prefaced my statement with the words "I am sure." I decided to trust my memory to the aegis. Much of what can pass for fact is a simple comment based on strong faith or personal confidence. Life must go on. It is impossible to test everything with the thoroughness of a scientific experiment. So in practice we get something like a 2-phase system, facts based on faith and proven facts. Of course, wearing a white hat, we can also express facts that we have taken for granted, but then we must absolutely specifically point out their secondary importance. I think I am right when I say that the Russian merchant fleet occupies a significant place in world trade. I once read that the reason Japanese officials have such large expense accounts is because they give their entire salary to their wives. I'm sure I'm right when I say that the new Boeing 757 is much quieter than the planes of the previous generation. An angry listener may notice that these non-binding phrases can allow someone to say anything, and with impunity. Someone once told me that, as his friend told him, Churchill secretly admired Hitler. The way is open for speculation, gossip and gossip. This is, in general, so. Nevertheless, We need a way to express facts based on faith. The important point is the application of facts. Before we start acting on the fact or making decisions based on it, we need to check it. In this way, we figure out which of the facts based on faith can be useful, and then we try to verify it. For example, if the supposed noiselessness of the Boeing 757 is decisive when choosing a place for an airport, then, of course, we should move from the status of confidence to the status of verified. The main rule of thinking in a white hat can be formulated as follows: you should not say anything with more confidence than it deserves. When a statement is properly defined as based on faith, entering information is acceptable. Remember the two-phase system? Let me repeat that we simply need a link of faith, just as tentative, hypothetical, and provocative statements are needed for thinking. They set the direction for further reflection, ahead of the facts. Now we come to a rather difficult moment, when confidence turns into an opinion. I can believe that the Boeing 757 is quieter. I can also believe, and this is the opinion, that a woman smokes more and more often, when faced with stress. Let me say right now that your own opinion should never be present while thinking in a white hat. This will destroy the very essence of the white hat. Of course, you can convey the real opinion of someone else. According to Professor Schmidt, flight using only a person's own strength will never be possible. Pay special attention to the fact that the foundation of a fact on faith means only that you are sure that it is a fact, but have not yet thoroughly checked it. It's better to have two types of facts: verified facts, unverified facts, beliefs. Ultimately, it's all about attitude. When a person puts on a white hat, he expresses neutral component statements. They are laid out on the table. There can be no question of using them to promote a certain point of view. As soon as it seems that the statement is used for this purpose, there is a suspicion that the thinker has abused the role of the white hat. Sometimes a white hat becomes second nature to a person. He no longer tries to imperceptibly make the necessary statements to win arguments. He develops the neutral objectivity of a scientist observer or researcher who carefully makes notes about flora and fauna, having no desire to use the described species in the future. The task of the cartographer is to make a map. A thinker in a white hat lays out samples on the table, like a schoolboy who extracts some coins, chewing gum and a frog from his pockets. Chapter 10: Thinking in a White Hat. Japanese approach: discussion, evidence, and agreement. Where do ideas come from if no one puts them forward? At the beginning, make a map. The Japanese have never adopted Western habits of arguing. Perhaps this is due to the fact that in a feudal society it was too impolite or even risky to express disagreement. Or maybe it's because mutual respect and self-esteem are too important for the Japanese to allow themselves to criticize each other or argue. It is likely that Japanese culture does not attach as much importance to the idea of self as Western culture. The reasons for the dispute are often rooted deep in the ego. The most likely explanations are that Japanese culture was not influenced by the Greek style of thinking, subsequently improved by medieval monks in order to prove the fallacy of heretical views. It seems unusual to us that the Japanese do not argue. It seems unusual to the Japanese that we cherish the idea of a dispute. Participants in Western-style meetings come with their own points of view and in many cases expect a certain result from the discussion and the agreement of other participants with this expected final conclusion. Further, the meeting consists of arguments about each point of view, during which participants can see which of them will withstand criticism and find more supporters from among those present. Thus, the initial ideas are changed and improved. It's like sculpting a marble sculpture when the final product is carved out of a block of stone. Discussions at Western-style conciliation meetings are less intense, as there are no clear winners or losers. In this case, the result is a jointly accepted decision acceptable to all. It is somewhat like sculpting a sculpture out of clay. The core is overgrown with pieces of clay, acquiring a final shape. Japanese meetings are not of a conciliatory nature. It's hard for Westerners to understand that the Japanese come to meetings without pre-formulated ideas. The purpose of the meeting: listen. Then why doesn't the meeting take place in absolute silence? Because each subsequent participant, in response to the performance of the previous ones, puts on a white hat and presents his portion of neutral information. Gradually, the map becomes more accurate, it becomes richer and more detailed. When the map is drawn up, everyone clearly sees the way. I am not saying that this process lasts only one meeting, it can take a week or a month. The bottom line is that no one expresses prepared ideas. The information is presented in the manner of a white hat, slowly organizing into an idea. This happens in front of the participants. The Western point of view is that the form of an idea should be forged in disputes. The Japanese point of view is that ideas are born as the germ of a crystal and then grow, acquiring a certain form. All of the above. Something like an idealized view of the contrast between the Western dispute and the Japanese exchange of information. I intended to emphasize this contrast rather than follow those who believe that everything Japanese is wonderful and worthy of imitation. We cannot change the culture, so we need some mechanism that would allow us to overcome our habit of arguing. It is for this purpose that the white hat serves. When this role is played by all participants of the meeting, its essence boils down to the following: let's all pretend to be Japanese at a Japanese meeting. Artificial means and idioms like the white hat of thinking are needed to make such a switch possible. Appeals and explanations have little practical value. I don't want to go into the explanation of the reasons why the Japanese are no more inventive than Westerners. Ingenuity may require a culture based on the idea of the ego, educating people who are able to defend ideas that seem crazy to everyone. We can do this in a more practical way by resorting to deliberate provocations within the framework of lateral thinking, which I talk about in other works, as well as in the chapter on thinking in a green hat. Chapter 11. Thinking in a white hat: Facts, Truth, and Philosophers. How true is the fact? What value are the language games of philosophy, absolute truths and truths in general? Truth and facts are not as closely related as most people might imagine. Truth refers to a verbal game system known as philosophy. Facts have to do with verifiable experience. Practical people who are not very interested in such topics can skip this chapter and move on to the next one. If the swans we happen to see were white, can we dare to say that all swans are white? We can. That's what we do. At the moment, the statement is a true summary of our experience. In this sense, this is also a fact. The first black swan we see makes the statement false. Thus, we move from truthfulness to falsehood with startling suddenness. At the same time, if we look at the facts, we have the experience of meeting 100 white swans versus the experience of meeting one black swan. Thus, based on experience, we can say, most swans are white. In general, swans are white. A little over 99% of swans are white. This thing called by and large is extremely practical, but has no meaning for logic. The word all plays an essential role in the statement all swans are white. This is due to the fact that logic must follow from one absolute truth to another. If this is true, then it follows from this: when we encounter the first black swan, the statement all swans are white becomes false, unless we decide to call the black swan something else. Now the essence of the question boils down to words and definitions. If we decide to leave whiteness as an essential property of the swan, then the black swan is something else. If we reject whiteness as an essential part of the definition, then we can include a black swan in it, basing the definition of a swan on other characteristics. Making such definitions and manipulating them is the essence of philosophy. The result of thinking in a white hat. Information that can be used. So idioms in general are quite acceptable. To give these rather vague idioms some concreteness is the task of statistics. It is not always possible to collect such data, so we often have to use a two-phase confidence system, a proven fact. In general, large corporations that spend their funds based on extrapolated data on future sales get into trouble. However, you can specify several companies that have done so and have been successful. Sales will tend to increase if prices are lowered. When house prices rise, the level of sales may actually increase due to speculation, fear of inflation, and fear of being left behind. If you work hard, you will achieve success in life. At the same time, many hard-working people are not particularly successful. There's a spectrum of probability that can be expressed as follows: always true, usually true, generally yes rather than no, somewhere in half of the cases, often sometimes true, occasionally true. There are known cases. Never true. Can't be true or controversial. How far does the role of the white hat allow you to go? As before, the answer to this question lies in the breadth of information. For example, sometimes it is useful to know that some things happen only occasionally. Measles is usually not dangerous, but sometimes it can be followed by a secondary infection, for example, an ear infection. In very rare cases, vaccination can cause encephalitis. There are cases when dogs of this breed, being in an irritated state, attack children. Obviously, the possession of such information is of great value. But there is also a dilemma. In the second example, people may exaggerate the danger of encephalitis provoked by vaccination thousands of times. So, in order to avoid unintentional misinformation, it is better to provide real data. Is it possible to have funny cases within the framework of thinking in a white hat? One person fell out of the plane without a parachute and survived. They say Ford developed the Edsel car based on marketing research, and it turned out to be a complete disaster. These may actually be facts, which means that a thinker in a white hat has the right to express them. They should be defined as anecdotes or incidents. Often, developments based on marketing research are not successful. Take, for example, the Edsel car, the design of which, as they say, was based on marketing research. It was a mistake. The above statements are not an example of acceptable thinking in a white hat, unless the statement that developments based on marketing research are not successful is confirmed by a large number of facts. Cats can fall from roofs, but this is not their usual behavior. Exceptions stand alone because it is an exception. We notice black swans because they are usually much smaller than white ones. We notice a man who survived falling out of a plane without a parachute because this is something unusual. Edsel always gives an example with a car for the same reason. The goal of thinking in a white hat is to be practical. So we have to be able to give out all kinds of information. An important aspect is its breadth. All experts predict that the interest rate will fall by the end of the year. I spoke with 4 experts, and each of them predicted that the interest rate will fall by the end of the year. I've talked to Mr. Flint, Mr. Ziegler, Ms. Collado and Mr. Suarez, and they all think the interest rate will fall by the end of the year. There are 3 levels of accuracy in front of us, and even the 3rd level may not be complete enough. I might want to know when you talk to these experts. Thinking in a white hat does not imply anything absolute. This is the direction in which we are trying to get better. Chapter 12 Thinking in a white hat. Who puts on a hat? Put on your own hat. Ask someone to put on a hat. Ask everyone to wear white hats. Wearing a hat, give the answer yourself. These phrases can describe most possible situations. This means that you can ask someone to wear a white hat, you can be asked to do the same, or you can decide to wear it yourself. What was wrong with our sales organization and promotion company? To answer this question, I'm going to put on my white hat. We contacted 34% of retailers. Only 60% of this number took products. Of those who were interested in the products, 40% took 2 samples each. 70% of those we spoke to said the price was too high. There are already 2 similar products on the market at a lower price. Now think about it while wearing a red hat. We have a weak product with an inflated price, we have a bad image on the market, competitors have better advertising and more of it. We don't attract the best sellers. The emotional aspect of thinking in a red hat in this case may be more important, but in a white hat, it cannot be brought to the fore, except only by retelling the words of potential customers. Let's start by putting on white thinking hats and telling everyone what we know about juvenile delinquency. What are the data? What do the reports say? Who has a statement? You told me you were going to order prime computers. Could you comment on this by wearing a white hat? I'm not interested in your assumptions about what would happen if we lowered the prices for transatlantic transportation to $250. I want to hear from you the thoughts born under the white hat. It is clear that thinking in a white hat excludes such important things as suspicion, intuition, judgments based on experience and opinions. Of course, for this purpose there is a white hat as a way to request information in its purest form. You asked me to put on a white hat and explain why I was changing jobs. The salary is no higher, the privileges are the same, the distances from home are the same, the career prospects are the same, the type of work is the same. That's all I can say, wearing a white hat.
Dear listeners, write down what other books you would like to listen to in audio format. Thank you for your likes and comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We wish you all the best.